Hey folks, welcome back to Only Best Fantasy Novels. My name is Robin, and today I want to talk about a book that does just such a brilliant job of blending fantasy and horror. A standalone book, and it's a book that's been on my TBR for a while. And now that I've read it, I wish I'd picked it up a lot sooner. And that is Christopher Buehlman's Between Two Fires. So, this is a historical horror fantasy set in, like, I believe the 1300s. And in this story, we follow a excommunicated knight, a child with a whiff of the supernatural about her, and a priest. Let's call him a hedonistic priest, as they travel across Europe to get to see the Pope. Against the backdrop of a world that's slowly being destroyed by plague and by the appearance of literally hell on earth. So, yeah, that's kind of that in a nutshell. That's what this book is about, and it is exactly as wild as it sounds. Like I said, this book is definitely fantasy that's way more on the side of horror. So definitely the kind of book you would read around Halloween, right? Anyway, so like I said, I regret not reading this book sooner because it was good. It was just really, really good. First and foremost, we have the characters. We have an excommunicated knight. He was essentially shafted out of his holdings because politics. He along the way he lost his wife. He lost he basically lost everything, and he went rogue. He became a brigand and all of that, and he, after coming across essentially destroyed homestead, he met this child who managed to kind of worm her way into his graces, and they set off on this quest to go see the Pope. And along the way they pick up the priest, and this character, this knight in particular, is colorful, to put it mildly. Like, he is basically the anti. He's basically the antithesis of what you would think when you think of a knight from this period. He's everything that a knight is not, and in terms of his personality, his actions, his choices, and all of that. That being said, he does have a core of honor in him that drives him to take on challenges that no one else is willing to fathom necessarily, and he does have a core of steel to him that, like certain types of steel, it will not bend, but it will break at some point or the other. And we do see that. We very much do see that happening in this book in one of the coolest ways possible. So he's that type of character, that type of gruff. Yeah, you know you are. I bet you can already tell where we're going with that type of character. Then we have this mysterious child who is a bit too innocent to be traveling to even exist in this world as it exists at this point, much as to be traveling in the company that she does. But it's quite clear that this child is very sketchy, to put it mildly. And when I say sketchy, we don't necessarily know what side of the fence she's backing for, because this is very much the end times, effectively. It's literally hell on earth, and we don't know if this child is a minion of the forces of hell or heaven. That's very unclear from what happens. The only thing that's clear about this child is that she is something. And then we have and with her in particular, like, she serves as both a foil to the knight to kind of keep him on track. She serves as a litmus to the story in terms of you can tell when you couldn't tell when something is going to go south, but based on her actions, you just know, exactly what's going to happen next. So she has a very interesting place in the story, and then of course we have the hedonistic priest, who is a priest only because he was effectively forced into the profession, and he's dealing with exactly this kind of situation with all the grace you could expect. And when I say hedonistic, he's very much hedonistic in all senses of the word. So in certain ways, he serves almost like comedic relief. In certain ways, he does have other purposes that become clearer as the story unfolds. But I'm not going to touch on those. That's for you to read in this cover. So it's an interesting cast of characters. At the same time, it's a very tropey cast of characters. Like, just from describing the knight and describing the child, you can already think of so many different duos that these two match. And even the priest, you can already tell how the dynamics of this unit and how they function. Especially if there's nothing new there. There's nothing different there. There's nothing spectacular there. It's a formula that works. And it works well, especially, it works well within the context of the story. Because the next thing we have to talk about is the plot of this book. And it's essentially a travelogue from when they gather and when the girl sets the goal of going to meet the Pope. And they start traveling and they go through all sorts of crazy trials, all sorts of horrific trials. Because once again, this book is very much horror. It's very much fantasy with such a heavy dose of horror that if someone says this is a horror book with a splash of fantasy, I would not even argue them. Like, it's very much a book that does a really good job of fusing the two genres. And when I say that they face some horrific challenges, they face them in the true sense of the word on multiple levels, not just in terms of the obvious Christian influence. They face horrors, everything from the monstrous, the grotesque, from the emotional, from the gory. Like you name a flavor of horror, and they face it over the course of this book. And not just face it, it's often described to us in these scenes, not necessarily in explicit graphic detail, but sometimes in enough detail that little is left to the imagination. So this book does get intense at certain points. And when I say they face all sorts of horror, like the horror is not restricted to to mere monsters and these kind of things. The horror very much it ranges everywhere from the supernatural to the more mundane type of horror of watching of being forced to watch your life crumble around you and that kind of thing. It very much ranges, the psychological, you can see. It very much spans the gamut of that particular spectrum. So, there's that. What else do I want to say about this book? I think I do have to shout out Christopher Buehlman's writing, because this is the first book I've ever read from him. It is a standalone. And he does just such an excellent job of crafting these characters, even though they're very standard trope-like characters. He does a good job of breathing life into them, making them their own thing, putting them through some journeys that they're like, you given the basic setup, you can already tell where their stories are headed, but nevertheless crafting them in a way that leaves you engaged and wanting to see what happens to them next. So he does a good job on that front. Obviously, he does as you can tell from what I've talked about before, he does a spectacular job with not just with the setting, but the way that setting impacts the story, like the way that the challenges that these characters face as a result of the scenario that's being played out around them, essentially. So he does a good job of that. There's some pretty obvious like ideas and concepts that are just kind of interwoven in the story, but those are baked in more as a consequence of the characters and the setup of the story. They're not necessarily themes that he deep dives and explores and proselytizes on or anything of the sort. They're just part and parcel of the setting, part and parcel of these characters and their relationships and their ideologies and just watching their lives unfold in this horrific hellscape that they travel through. So there is that to look forward to as well. Like, this is a book that has meat to it. You can think of it when it comes to, in terms of like the thematic work and the concepts that are played with and that kind of thing. It very much has meat to it. Especially, I think, if you come from a Christian background, which I don't come from anyway. I think you would find this book a little more. I would actually be interested to know how you find this book, like how. Especially if you're like a faith, if you have like a strong faith, I'd be very interested to have your take on how certain scenarios are dealt with in this book, especially with like the ideas of redemption, because there is one particular scene in here that just that touches on redemption and who can be redeemed and how low you can sink and still be redeemed. So I think that would be an interesting perspective to get from someone on. So there is, as you can tell from that, there's quite a bit of food for thought baked in here. But that's not the focus of this story. This is very much a action romp. Not like an action focused romp, but it is very much a romp just across a hellscape that I can really only describe as a journey. It doesn't quite fit the mold of like an action thriller adventure. It's more of an epic fantasy style travelogue. But holy crap, this book was intense. It was engaging. There were times when, like, I just had to, like, my mind was just blown by some of the things that happened in here. Especially certain scenes later on, and the way that Christopher Buehlman decides to depict certain scenarios. When I really stop and think of the ramifications, and if I were to endure what was described here, like, it was just, yeah, it's a rough book. I can see this book definitely forcing a few DNFs, especially because of some of the content. Like, yeah, whatever the trigger, definitely Google the trigger warnings for this book before you pick it up, is all I'll say. So yeah, all in all, a banger of a book. A banger of a book. Definitely an experience that I won't forget anytime soon. Yeah, I think that's really all I have to say about Christopher Buehlman's Between Two Fires. Definitely one of the best books I've read this year. Probably one of the best fantasy standalones I've ever read. Yeah, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.